Okay, I'm Tshimanaga Beya. I'm currently working as a counselor at STARTS in the direct services team. And STARTS itself is an expert organization on trauma and torture. That's why we end up working with lots of African. But previous to my current occupation, I trained in theology and worked as a pastor and itinerant teacher and public speaker for a few years. By November this year, I'll make 20 years in Australia. Time flies, you know. Yeah, I must say that I didn't really know a lot or much about Australia before coming, except that there were Aborigines and you know, it's a place that welcome migrants. The majority of Australians are migrants, and so I was a bit curious coming. My first impressions were, okay, that's a country that is quite remote, far away from the rest of the world. It took us hours to get to Australia, and then when we got here, the first thing that struck me was the fact that it was a multicultural. And I remember, you know, coming to Australia and at the context of studies where I was reminded that they don't speak English here but Australian instead. And so that was interesting. I must say that comparing Australia to Europe, where I did my undergrad studies in theology and travel to a few countries there, I'll say that Australia offers more opportunities, and there's more opportunity for social integration. And in terms of profession, I mean, I didn't really experience discrimination a lot. It was just about not thinking of myself as a migrant, of course, but just as any other Australia, you know, tapping into my own potential to perform. And I just noticed that you know, I was judged on the basis of my performances. And so there's that opportunity for migrants, more so here than in other so-called developed countries. Challenges, of course, you know, ignorance, the ignorance that you face as you meet with people, because Australia is quite far away, cut off from, there's a culture that develops itself here. There's no that awareness of it being part of the world and understanding other cultures and so on. And so there's that ignorance that then one face, and it's not always pleasant when they ask you questions that betrays kind of a, you know, how can I put it, that one would sometimes consider a bit offensive, but if you take it in the context of this person doesn't really know what he's talking about or she's talking about, then the question that would have been offensive become an opportunity for education. There is the challenge also of not finding the kind of food that we are accustomed to as Africans, African products. These are the challenge that I was confronted with initially, but I noticed that as time went by, that changed with the great number of refugees coming in, and some of them opening businesses, and they have license to import some of these African foods. So it's a lot better now than it used to be. It's mainly negative, really. At the end of the day, you have a bunch of victims who come to Australia and who are hopeless and bring their problems here and become a burden to the government. Yeah, that's the angle that we get a lot of African stories from. And I think it can only change by having Africans themselves involved in this process. Because there's no one else who understands African issues and African people better than Africans themselves. To the extent that they're not met at equal footing. It's almost like I'm up here, you are down there. I know what is right for you and how you should behave and organize your family and all this. It's not about two worlds meeting each other and having a conversation. In that context, I think it's a bit racist. I think we could show a lot more maturity in how we handle ourselves, particularly as communities. Now, to some extent, you would say maybe we can't help it because of the nature of the makeup of the African community. People will leave, if the majority refugees who have been in refugee camps for decades, and so they've developed a certain pattern of behavior and thinking that is dysfunctional. But it takes time to become aware of it and seek appropriate help and then reform the way we think and go about dealing with our problems. Because the outside community is watching. They can only judge us on the basis of what they observe. And so we can't blame them if all that they get is quite negative. So being more united, I think, will be an asset that can help move forward the African issues.
Kodeko bongolanga bongo sana ngo lwemba ye bilango tona nango ve sandoko zombi nazangi mayele yako sepelisa yo